I'm here today with part 2 of our sewing extravaganza. And today we're going to look at sewing on like tags and journaling cards and layering, sewing, yeah, stuff like that. So without further ado, we're just going to jump right in because I've got a whole pile of stuff over here ready to go for doing some of the sewing today. So first we're going to look at this. These are just some backgrounds that I got from Pink Monarch on Etsy. And I thought the first thing I'll show you is how I just literally sew around a tag. If you missed part 1 of this video, you might want to check that out first, because I do talk about sewing on different types of paper and things like that. Again, if you're just joining me, I use a Brother CX155LA. It's a middle of the road sewing machine. It's nothing fancy by any means. Excuse me. I am froggy throated this morning. Okay, so a lot of times what I like to do with a tag like this, so this is just the background and I've glued on this fussy cut mushroom here. And so I'm going to say I want to just have some sewing around the edge of that to set it off. The back is just plain paper. So if I sew around the edge, it's just going to set it off a little bit. So I usually choose a corner. I go down to just my plain stitch. This is the most basic version of this. I think I'm getting a cold. And I just sew around. This one I'm going to do like the neat way. So I sew to the edge. I've got my corners rounded, so I'm going to put one little stitch across, and then I'm going to lift up and go across the bottom. I'm going to put my little stitch across. Then I will come back up the side. And my image goes to the edge, so I'm going to just go right over my image there as though it is a part of the tag, because it is a part of the tag. Little corner stitch. That little corner stitch that I'm doing is just a little diagonal stitch to help me round the corner. So because it's harder to come to like a complete, you know, these are little tiny rounded corners. Okay, and then I catch that first stitch with my, you know, I go over it. And then we pull that off. Okay, so now that does a lot just to set off the tag, right? This is black thread that I'm sewing with. I'm doing this so that I can show you guys and you can see the best. But I've literally just put one stitch around the thing and that's it. And that does a lot. And on the back side, you can see now it kind of frames the tag as well. So that's awesome. I do that quite a bit. When I say I'm going to go sew around things, oftentimes this is what I'm doing. Now, this could be a tuck spot in a journal. It could be a, you know, journaling card, whatever. You could make it into tags. So we did that. Then let's look at, so this tag, I have glued on one of Tracy's Fox's fussy cut florals down here. And so say I want to set that off on this journal card. What I can do is sew a box just around the floral, and that will kind of frame it down in the corner here because it's kind of on this busy paper, right? So I'm going to set my needle down in about where I think the corner, you know, of where this frame is going to be. And I am going to just start sewing the closest I can to like a square rectangle-ish thing. And it does not matter, you know, like you can try to be very precise about this if you want to. I'm not, because I kind of like the messy look. So I'm going to go maybe up a little more and then come across to catch the first threads that I sewed. And then I'm going to go around it a second time. And like we did yesterday on the sewing video when we did some of this framing stuff or whatever, I'm going to try to purposefully not sew directly on top of the sewing I just did. So that you can see that it's got a couple lines of sewing going on. All right. And there we go. We have now set that flower off by sewing around it. We just got a couple messy lines of sewing, right? I don't know how much this is going to focus because I'm like an inch from it because I've got it on a wide frame. Anyway, you could go ahead at this point and sew around the entire tag as well. Matter of fact, let's just do it. I'm going to go super fast this time because I am not going to try and round the corners or, you know, do the fancy little diagonal stitch thing or anything. And over here on this side, we're going to overlap our stitching a little bit, which is fine because that's where we put the little frame window thing, right? And I'm going to go around twice. And again, I'm trying not to sew over where I sewed the first time most of the time. And I am trying to divorce myself from wanting to be very neat in my stitching and just try to let it flow and let it happen as it goes. I used to try to plan out my messy stitching, like to try to be intentional in my messiness, and that was a disaster. Like seriously, try to be messy on purpose. Okay, so there we go. That actually sets it off even more. And then on the back you have some cool stitching, and you know, you've heard me say it a bunch of times, I don't mind seeing the stitching through on the back. I actually like it most of the time because I think it provides unique places to start journaling in. So this is, you know, framing this off. If you had a little bit up here, you could put that up there and frame around it as well. So, all right, moving on. I've got another tag, and this one is another background, and I've glued this little Tim Holtz ballerina girl on there, but as you can see, she kind of gets lost in the background because she's very similar. So this time I'm going to frame her, but instead of sewing a big rectangle, I'm going to try and kind of very loosely go around her like this, okay? So I'm going to just pick a place to start, you know, somewhere. And then I'm going to just kind of very loosely, and I don't have a free arm on, this is just a regular old sewing needle. Since we're doing, this would be really hard to do on like a whole page of a book or something. But since we're just doing a tag, I can maneuver it around under my machine fairly easily. Hold on, I lost where her little other arm was. There we go. Okay, I'll come back around the edge here, and then I'm going to go around her again. Now that I've kind of defined her with that first set of stitching, I can somewhat follow my second set of stitching with that first one there. And I'm going to go one more time just because that those first two, I was a little too overlapping, so I'm going to go a second time. Okay, so I do this a lot. I'll outline an image with some sewing like this, and it sets her off, so now she's not so lost in the thing, right? Then again, you do end up with some unique looking sewing on the back, but again, I don't mind it. If this looks too weird for you, you could always go around the edge. And we'll just do one really quick around the edge. We'll just do one. Whoops, what did I catch there? I think it just caught the thread weird. All right. Now, say this was a tag and I wanted to put a little topper on. Here, I've got, whoops, just bogged the camera. I've got a piece of paper here that I'm just going to fold in half. Right? And if I wanted to catch a topper on top of this tag or journal card or something, or maybe a side pull, before you go over that edge, drop your paper on there. So I've got one on the back and one on the front. I've just got it folded over. And now as I go, I'll just sew that right on. And now I've got the topper stuck on there as well. So if you have a weird shaped sewing, and of course, like I said, I am not trying to catch my threads and make them look nice right now because that would take too long. So if you have a weird shape on the back because you've gone around something, you can put a frame around it like this, and that seems to help a little, right? So, or you could back this whole thing with some coffee stained paper and then you wouldn't see any of that if it bothers you, or if you don't like the look for your particular journal. So there's her. There's this little ballerina girl tag. Now I've got one more of the big tags. I've got this one with this little butterfly on, and I want to put this butterfly on as well, and I want to put some ruffle down the side as I sew. So I want to put the ruffle along this edge, and I want the butterfly to go on top of the ruffle as I go. So, but I want to put a frame around the whole thing. This time, I'm going to start back up in the corner here, but this time as I sew, I'm going to switch back and forth between a straight stitch and a zigzag stitch to give it some interest. And so I'm going to start up here with a straight stitch. Now, if you're going to do this, you have to remember that your straight stitches only take up a tiny little spot. And if you do a zigzag, it takes up more room. So you've got to stay in a little bit from the edge. Then I'm going to switch to a small little zigzag stitch here. I'm just making it very narrow. And I'm going to go back to a regular straight stitch. And I'm going to do my little diagonal there. I'm going to go back to a zigzag for a second here. Okay, now I'm going to go back to a straight stitch because this is where I want to put the ribbon from the bottom corner and up a little bit. So in order to do that, before I get all the way over to the edge, I need to put my fabric underneath. So I'm going to lift up my presser foot. I'm going to put my fabric down, and I'm going to sew over a few stitches now to get to the middle of my fabric. One more. There we go. Now, can you see where can you see? Yeah, so I'm on the edge of the paper here, but I also have I've caught my ribbon. So now I'm going to take my handy palette knife. Like I showed you yesterday, this is how I use to shove things under here a lot of times so that I don't get my fingers anywhere near. And I'm going to go ahead and sew up here a little bit. And I kind of want this to be a slightly messy one. So I'm going to make it, sometimes I'm going to sew over it with the fabric going to this direction. Then I'm going to move the fabric in this direction a little, right? I keep forgetting I have to move my hand. Okay, now I want to catch this butterfly on top as well. So I'm gonna lift up my presser foot. My ribbon's going in this direction right now, but I want it to come back out here. So I'm gonna put my fold in, and then I'm gonna put my butterfly in right up in the center of its little body. And I'm only gonna sew over the center of its body because then the wings will be kind of free, and I like that look. So I'm also gonna form my final little ruffle here and hold it down with my magical palette knife as I come across here. Okay. So right now I'm catching the butterfly and the last of the ruffle. All right. Then I'm going to get up here and I'm going to do a little bit more zigzagging, and I'm going to take this zigzag around the corner here. And then I'm going to go back to finish off with the regular stitch. Okay, so there we go with that one. We caught the butterfly, so we've got a little bit of a ruffle down there. It is not as messy as I was hoping for, but that's okay. It still looks cool. So now we didn't have to do separate stitching because we caught the fabric ruffle and the butterfly. And look at the butterfly guy. He kind of stands up off the page. Isn't that cute? And on the back, we just have this really cute border of like some zigzag, some straight stitch. Right? And that just adds some cute interest. It's the little details. Again, guys, it's the little details. So I love that one. That'll go in a book for sure. All right, now let's talk about some layering. Okay, so I've got this example right here, and this would be cute if we wanted to like glue this down in just the way it is. But to add interest to it, we can do some sewing around some things. So this first one, I'm going to say, none of this is glued down, right? I'm going to say I want to sew around this little piece of muslin. Okay. And this time I'm going to do it where it all goes through to the back. So as I sew this down, it's going to sew this down and this book page down. You might want to glue the book page down first if you're not going to sew around the book page. I just didn't do that. So I'm going to go around this muslin. Now, there's two ways to do this. If you're going to sew some fabric down to paper, the paper does not move, right? It doesn't give very much. And the fabric will want to move around, and depending on how big a piece of fabric, sometimes it can be a heck of trouble trying to sew around. I'm going to go a second time around. If you don't like, when in doubt, if you don't like the frame that you sewed the first time, go a second time around. It just makes everything look cooler. And if you don't like those two and you don't like how they lined up, go a third time around. Okay. So like I was saying, you might want to sometimes tack your fabric down first, because as you're sewing, sometimes it'll stretch or it'll pull, or like lace, big pieces of lace will stretch or pull. And so then all of a sudden you think you're going straight, and you notice your thing is going to it's skewing a little bit, and then you get wonky, right? And sometimes wonky is fine, and sometimes wonky drives you nuts. So there's a way to add some interest by sewing some fabric on top, right? Now I am going to put this little butterfly on, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm only going to sew the middle of his body. So I'm going to put my presser foot down right at the top of his little, like where his antenna would be. And I'm going to go down, and then I'm going to reverse back up to the top. And then these I'm going to trim up closer. So now we've got, so then when you do that, automatically the little wings are so easy to come up and they're 3D. So that's cute, isn't it? And that was not hard to do. Now, of course, like I said, I'm not minding my threads, and all of these can get cut off. You don't have to leave them. But that's what that looks like. Threads, threads, threads. Okay, so there's one quick idea for setting that off. Now it adds texture. The fabric behind the little butterfly adds texture, and that little bit of sewing adds a lot of interest, right? Now let's talk about layering in two different ways here. So I've got just a polka dot card here. I've got some book page. I've got this floral image, and then I've got one of my little butterfly stamps that I want to put down here, okay? The first thing that we could do is sew through all of this, and we can do in layers, right? So we don't want the flower thing to sew through the middle of the butterfly, so you have to sew in layers. So firstly, I'm going to take those off, and I've got just this. I'm going to sew this on, but I'm also going to show you as I do it a way that I do sewing sometimes. I'm going to put it on, I'm going to leave it on a straight stitch and do the straight stitch for a little bit. Then I'm going to switch to a zigzag, but I want this one to look really almost like overly sloppy. So I'm going to, while I'm sewing it, rather than just kind of letting the feed dogs pull it through, I'm going to push it through a little bit so that it makes the stitches look really messy and wonky. So like my sewing machine has an issue, which sometimes I do just, by sheer happenstance. Oh, come on, my chair doesn't want to roll. There we go. So I'm going to push as I sew. And if you push slower and then faster, you'll get kind of an elongated, then shorter, then elongated. So let it do its thing for a minute the way it wants to. And then I push a little bit. And then I push a little bit and let it do its thing again. Okay, and then I'm going to go back to a regular stitch. You can even do it with a regular stitch. It doesn't show as much unless you look really closely. Okay, so we have our first layer done. And see how that stitching, that zigzag gets a little wonky there? On purpose. It's supposed to look just slightly sloppy. Sometimes doing that just along the, if you've got a page, let's see, you've got a journal page. Sometimes if you just want some interest or something, you can do a little bit of that stitching, just put a little line of it somewhere on your page, and it just adds a little bit of pizzazz. All right, so now that frames our little flower nice, but we're going to sew our flower on as well. So I'm going to start back up in the same corner. I don't know why, I just like starting in the same corner over and over again. And this time where the wonky zigzag is, I'm going to do straight edges, and then I'll put a little wonky zigzagging up in the opposite corner of this one. So I'm just going to, and because I'm doing wonky sewing, I'm not trying to stay in the nice frame of this flower or anything like that, right? I'm just trying to get the edges caught. Okay, then up here, I'm going to switch to zigzag. Whoops, what did I just do? Okay, and I'm going to pull it through a little bit. You can push it through, or like here I went to the back and I just kind of pull it as I direct and push, right? Okay, so there we go. Now I've got some wonky zigzagging up in that corner. And now I want the butterfly to go down here. And so I want to sew around that as well. So I'm on zigzag. So I will let it do some zigzag here and then force it through a little weird. Then I'm going to switch back to regular. I don't want to do the zigzag over the flower part where I'm overlapping because I feel like that'll be too much. It'll detract too much from that flower. Oops. Okay, let's cut some of this away a little bit so it's not just super crazy looking on the front. Okay, so there we go. Now we've got it layered up. Would I do this with black all the time? I'm not sure. I apologize for the shades, the shadow in here, guys. It was hard to get this set up and see the light red better. Anyway, so now we've got our layering going on, and let's check what the back looks like. Kind of crazy, but I kind of like it. Not, you know, that's the look I like. But if you don't like this look, or like I said, if it's not in the style of the journal you're doing right now, you can always cover this with coffee stain paper or another journaling card or something. And there we go. Now it doesn't look quite as crazy. You can always cover it with something, but like I said, I like this. I don't mind the way this looks. So there's that. Now, say you don't want that on the back, but you still want this look on the front. Okay? Now let's talk about that. So I've got another set of that same design, and I've got another card, and we want this on the card, but we don't want to see any of it on the back. Okay? So what we're going to do is sew around all of it just here. Now, I'm sewing with some old book page. It's, you know, fairly, it's not fragile, but I'm going to have a harder time pushing it, right, to do that wonky stitch. That's a lot harder to do on a single thickness. I wouldn't recommend doing too much of that on just a single thickness of like thin paper, because you'll rip your paper, you'll get it all caught up in your machine. You don't want to do that. So I'm gonna stick to, here's just a regular single stitch down the edge. And then over here, I'm going to put just a little bit of zigzagging. I'm going to go back to a regular stitch. And end it over here. Okay, so just went around the book page, the first part of it, right? Now we'll take our flower, throw that on here. I'm going to have the flower stick up off the top a little bit. So now I'm going to sew around it, and it does not matter that this isn't underneath it the whole time because it's still sewing on paper. So, know what I mean? I've got zigzag on this side over here. So I'm going to put a little zigzag over on this side. So I'll probably start with zigzag. Then I'm going to switch. I'm not even finishing the whole side in zigzag. We're just switching in and out of it a little bit. Now I'm just in straight stitch. And this is where my zigzag is over on this side. So I'm going straight stitch again. And then up around the corner, I'm going to do another little bit of zigzagging. There is no rhyme or reason to when I switch in and out of the zigzag very much. And back to straight stitch to finish up across. All right. All right, so now we have the flower sewn on, right? And it doesn't matter that I went up off the edge because I'm still sewing on paper. Now we want our butterfly down here in the corner. So, and it doesn't matter, again, you can sew off the edge, right? You'll still get that same look like this one, except we won't have any of the lines in the back. Okay, so this time I'm gonna start, nope, I'm still gonna start in that top corner over here. I'm just kind of using this hand, my left hand, to push down on this and kind of try to hold it all together as I go. You may want to put a little tack of glue underneath it so that it will hold it together, because it will want to move around. I just do this enough that I don't, I just go Wile E. Coyote most of the time. But if we want to take glue and put a little bit, but here's what I'm going to say. Only put it in the middle, because all we're trying to do is tack it, right? Because if you put the glue out to the edges, now you are sewing through glue, which even if it's dry glue, it's still harder on your machine, right? But if it's wet glue, take this advice if you haven't figured this out the hard way. If it's wet glue, then obviously your needle with thread that's supposed to be flowing through the eye of the needle is getting gunked up with glue. And I have made a mess out of my machine with Fabri-Tac, not thinking about it or putting it through too soon. And it's a mess. So I'd say if you're gonna put some glue on, put it in the middle and then sew around the edges. Wherever you're going to be sewing, if you were going to sew the middle of a butterfly on here, then put the glue anywhere but where you're going to be sewing so you don't ruin your machine. All right, now let's sew this little butterfly on. All right, I'm going to switch to a skinny little zigzag here to go across the bottom. I'm going to switch back to a straight stitch and finish it off. There we go. So now we have a layered up little piece, and we can glue that on. And when we glue it on, now we have all the look of sewing and none of the sewing lines on the back. This is also a great way to start. Like, we could put something else behind it. Maybe we could put some fabric behind it and sew this onto, put the fabric down, sew this onto the fabric, onto this. And that is a great way to start building the front of a journal cover. So like, here's our faux signature again, right? And if we wanted to make this the top of, like, say if that's our book cover and we wanted to make it the top of the book cover, this is a great way to just keep sewing around and layering it up. And then you just glue the whole thing onto the front of your journal. It's a lovely way to make just kind of a collaged, layered up cover piece. So let me set that back over there. So that's one way to do that. Then, so this one could be just glued on here, whatever way you want to. Okay, I'm not going to show you how to glue it on because you're smart people. Here I've got a tag, and I've got another butterfly and some Fabric Ruffle. So first, with a tag, a lot of times something that I will do when I say I'm going to go sew around something is literally just sew a straight edge around the tag, which looks great. It's just a way to kind of offset it. Or if you do a bunch of collaging on top of a tag, sewing around it, sometimes, like if I make a bunch of collage on top of a tag, I feel like it's, if I'm not super thrilled with the way the collage looks, like sometimes it's coming over the edge and some pieces don't, and I'm not necessarily thrilled. Often if I just sew a border around the edge of it, all of a sudden I'm like, oh, that brings it all together. I don't know why, but I feel like just the little bit of sewing the border on brings it all together. So this shape tag I would normally sew up and around the angles and down. I did bring one of like a different shape tag. So this one's got some scallops on bottom and some scallops on top. This would be really difficult to sew around, and then what do you do down here, right? So I'll just show you really quick with this one. I kind of employ that messy square thing. I'm just on a regular stitch here. This time I'm totally gonna just kind of pull it around the corner. I'm not even stopping. So you see, I'm not even stopping to make a square corner or anything. I'm just kind of pulling it. I slow down as I get to the corner and kind of just turn it as I go and try to make just kind of rounded off corners. Now, this way, I never get something that I like with one go round, which is fine because the point of this is to do like 2 or 3 go rounds. Some of them will get better into the corner. Some of them will be wider spins. Sometimes I go off the edge of the paper because I start going too fast. And the goal here is to just make a layered up, floofy loopy thing. So there we go. I've just gone and spun and spun and spun, and that creates that kind of really organic looking shape in the middle of the tag. And that way I didn't have to worry about going over all the scallops and all the edge and stuff like that. I still get this really cool interest there. And now I could put, you know, something, whoops, sorry. I could put something in the middle there. I could rip up some book page or some collage paper behind it. You could just put just this. You could put it down in the corner like this and leave the middle blank as like journaling space, right? So you can do all kinds of things with this. Sometimes this is a good mass make. I've done it in the past where I sat down and just sewed around a bunch of tags like this. And then sometimes, you know, ink the edges of them. Because let's not even pretend I love my inking. So oftentimes if I were going to do this, it would include some inking around the edges as well. But then I'd have a whole bunch of these ready to go so that if I'm making a journal, I can just pull, you know, some tag bases out. All right, so back to this guy. What I want to do with this one is add a fabric ruffle along the bottom and a butterfly on one of the corners or something. So I'm going to sew around the top. So I'm going to sew around the top and then across the bottom and then back up around. And when I go across the bottom, I'm going to try and catch my fabric and my butterfly in as I, well, probably not the butterfly because I'll be going sideways and I don't want him to go sideways. You can sew right across him if you want to, like that. But I like sewing in the middle of a butterfly. So I'll show you. We'll come back and do it. So I'm still just on a regular straight stitch. Okay, so now I'm down to almost the bottom, but this is where I've got to put my, remember, don't go all the way to the bottom. This is where I got to put my fabric in. Now I get to about middle-ish. And I get out my palette tool here. And this one I want to try and make a real fluffy ribbon. So I'm going to put lots of folds of fabric here. And then I can't forget when I get over to the side, I've got a butterfly. Oh, well, no, I'm not gonna. Remember, I'm going to put him on separate. Do you guys have to talk to yourselves like this when you craft? No, Nikki, remember what you were going to do? Don't do that. Don't put it on there yet. Okay. Now I'm going to come back up the side. Then when I get to the corner, I just lift my foot, spin to the direction I need to go. Lift my, well, I needed one more stitch there. That just gets loud because it's sewing over that super thickness of, come on, where the little hole reinforcer is. And down enough. Okay, now we don't need, hold on, where are those coming from? There we go. Okay, so we've got a super floofy ruffle down there, and now I want the butterfly to go on like this. So I'm gonna just go over his little body again. I always feel a little bit bad going over their little body. I'm gonna do a zigzag because this one's got a little wider, so it'll look kind of cute. And we'll trim off this top one a little. There we go. Super fun, easy tag. And that, I mean, if I weren't talking you through it, it would have taken me just a, seconds. And cutting off all these strings. So then you've got an outlined tag on the back, which I think just, brings a nice little completion to it, and on the front as well. And you could certainly put other stuff up here, but sometimes just a simple tag like that would look super cute clipped into the side of a book, right? Okay, then, oh, here. Okay, I was going to show you one of the things that I realized I didn't do much of was like talking through sewing in like pockets or tuck spots. So I've just got a large journal card here. This is just a large coffee stained index card. I folded it in half and I punched a little thumb hole, and I'm gonna sew around this piece really quick here onto the front. So I'm gonna sew around again, if you wanted to, oh, make sure I'm on one. If you wanted to, you could put a little bit of glue in the middle here to hold this down. I'm gonna do this circle thing. So remember, I'm just like kind of letting it go and trying to make the corners the best I can, but I don't mind, and I'm letting it be organic and slightly sloppy on purpose. And for some reason, 3's the charm when I'm doing this. So I usually almost always go 3 times around. And then I've got my flower here, and I'm going to do it slightly askew. And I'm going to go to make a difference between the two of them. I'm going to zigzag all the way around this with the skinny little zigzag here. Sometimes just varying your stitches, even if it's just between a zigzag and a straight stitch, that adds a lot of difference and contrast and all that sort of stuff. Okay, so now we've got that, right? Our pocket is still open. I mean, in order to make this a pocket, we need to sew it shut. But I'm going to do that at the same time as I'm sewing it onto the page. So what I'm going to do here, am I in frame? I apologize for all the times that I am totally out of frame and everything, and you guys can't see what I'm doing. I'm trying. So I'm going to, it's this side, this is the folded side. So, and this is the open side. This side and the bottom are what needs sewing to make it a pocket. So you could either sew those or glue them and then just glue this on the page. But I'm going to make it not only am I going to make this a pocket, but I'm going to make it so it's a tuck spot back here. So I'm going to take my one page out of my signature here and open it up so I don't sew my pages shut. And then I'm going to line it up as best I can with the bottom and the side edge here. And I'm going to start up here at the top, make sure everything is folded over, and put down my presser foot right at the edge. I just want a straight stitch for this. And I'm going to sew down and across. That's all I'm going to do. And it's going to do two things at the same time. Here, I am going to backstitch because that might get a little bit of stress on the edges of these where it's being pulled out to tuck things. So anytime that there's somewhere that's going to actually get some stress or some, you know, use like that, tuck spots or pockets, whenever I'm sewing something like that onto an actual book page, then I usually do reinforce the beginning and end of my stitching. Those places where the wear and tear will happen. Okay, so now it is a tuck spot and a pocket, and on the back side you have a little bit of interest because you've sewn through the page, right? So now we can tuck our butterfly tag behind, can go behind it still. And what do we got here? Let's see if this would fit. Probably too wide. Yeah, just slightly too wide, but you get what I'm saying, right? You're picking up what I'm laying down. That can go inside of the pocket there. So we've got some double pocket action going. And we've got this cool little thing that we just sewed. Again, if you took this off of here, that'd be cute on the front of a journal as well, or the front of a journal card. All right, then the kind of the last thing I wanted to talk about was, so I've got another thing, and I've got one of Tracy Fox's hearts here. The last thing I was going to talk about is you can sew. So like I've been doing in most of these, I've been sewing on top of the thing. But you can sew over the edges of things to give it a different look. So here, I'm going to start down at the point, and I'm going to put a zigzag on for this one. And I'm going to make it wider so that you'll really see the exaggerated, that it goes onto the design and off, on and off, on and off, okay? So I'm going to make my zigzag really wide so that you can see that. And now I'm going to keep, on your presser foot, there's that one little like middle mark that shows you kind of right in the middle, depending on which presser foot you have on. But like the standard one has this little mark right there. And that's where the needle comes down if you're on the center setting, not the 1/4 inch setting, but on mine it's number 4, or number 1, excuse me, the center. So for 4, a zigzag is going to spread your stitch however wide your stitch is. It's going to spread it equally to both sides of that middle mark. So I'm going to try to keep the edge of this in that middle mark as much as possible so that I know that my zigzag is spreading on both sides. And I'm going to just start going around here. And I think this is probably as close as you know could get to like that kind of quilted applique look without doing some hand stitching, which I see so many people doing some gorgeous slow stitching right now, and I'm super jelly because my hands will not allow me to do that. We can barely just sew on a button over here sometimes. I'm going to go slowly around the corners here, or not corners, the curves. So I make sure I'm kind of staying one side of my stitch on the inside and one on the outside. So there we go. That looks like kind of like a quilted applique, right? So instead of keeping my entire stitch right on the inside of the design. I've gone around the edge of the design. I mean, plus we end up with this cool look on the back here. But for this one, now it looks like I've kind of appliqued, you know, on like a quilt thing. This is kind of really cool to do. You can make things feel a little bit puffy, because like an applique sometimes will feel puffy on a quilt, right? So you can make something feel a little bit puffy on there. That's kind of cool. If you layer up a couple of things, if there's stuff behind it and you layer up a couple things, that's a cool way to add some interest to something. So you don't always have to sew, you know, like on here, that's upside down. On here, I'm sewing inside the image. So I'm sewing entirely on the paper as I go. Here I'm sewing over the edge. Just two different looks, right? All right. So guys, that's all I had kind of thought about for today. Now I'm going to open it up to questions and comments down in the comment section below. And you let me know if there's anything that I skipped that you guys really wanted to know about. Yeah, you just let me know if there are things that I'm missing, or things like if you want to see how I sew tuck spots into books and stuff like that. You know, if we took this and, you could, you know, the nice thing about something like this is you can just glue along the edges and then glue it into a book as a tuck spot. And then you're not going to see the stitching through. You can mass make a bunch of this and then, glue it in to books. You know, you don't always have to stitch it in. I like stitching in. It feels like probably the most permanent way to do it besides glue. Anyway, I really hope that this has helped. Let me know in the comments below if there are other things that you're like, I'm a beginner, or I'm a newbie, or I've been doing this for a while and I don't know how other people do this, or I want to know how to do, you know, XYZ. Whatever it is, let me know and I will do my best to try to show it in a video. Again, I apologize for the weird angles and I apologize for my raspy clearing my throat a lot this time, but I am super glad that you came and hung out with me today. I hope you found something interesting or inspiring, or a tip or a trick or something that you can take with you in this journey. If you have tips and tricks and things I didn't mention or something, put those in the comments below and share it with the rest of us if you're willing. And until I see you guys next time, have a wonderful morning, afternoon, evening, middle of the night, whatever time it is, on whatever side of this globe of ours that you live on. And until I see you next time, stay safe and stay healthy. And I hope that you have a chance to be crafty, do something that you love, take a walk, squeeze, hug someone extra hard. And I will see you guys very soon. All right. Take care and God bless you. Bye-bye.